Joining me. My name is Greg Stafford. These are day texts where we meet every weekday morning at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to consider a portion of the biblical record or other related histories or sources of knowledge and wisdom from the past that we can use and apply in our lives today. But we concentrate primarily on the biblical books and letters, and we're working our way through the New Testament. We are in 2 Timothy. And the first video in each series of new day texts for books or letters or documents contains some information about the history and textual transmission of the document. So you can go back to the first video in the 2 Timothy series if you'd like a little bit more information about the letter and its historical context. Okay, so we're working our way through 2 Timothy. We're in chapter 2. And I'm going to go ahead and read verses 11 through 15, and then we'll go ahead and make a brief application. I'll give an update on the CW Jaw Talk show this Saturday, and then we'll be on our way. Okay, so I'm going to read 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. Let me just make sure. Actually, it looks like today's text is 11 through 14. I was going to include 15, but I'll go ahead and stop it at 14. So verses 11 through 14, 2 Timothy chapter 2 read, "The saying is trustworthy. If together we died, together we will also live." The saying among the Christians of the first century. And then in verse 12, he writes to Timothy and says, "If we do not give up, we will live together as kings. If in the future we deny Jesus Christ, that one will deny us. If we act without faith, Jesus Christ remains faithful, for he is not able to deny himself." And of course, he's the one through whom we receive forgiveness from the Father. And so if we act without faith like Peter did 3 times before Jesus was put to death, we can be forgiven. But of course, acting with faith is better. And so to the extent that you can build up your faith and act based on the good reasons supporting your faith, you will not have to we will not be in a position where we act without faith as often as we would. All right, let's read the last verse, verse 14. He says, "You must remember these things, emphatically bearing witness before God, not to fight about words. For there is no value at all when it leads to the ruin of those listening." And this can happen in a number of different ways. Of course, we're talking about in a religious context here, but often we get in fights or arguments in a secular way too, which really end up benefiting no one. In my profession, my job, sometimes it's necessary because people don't always agree on the value of property. And so you cannot always tell how certain negotiations are going to go. Nevertheless, when we're talking about spiritual things, Paul says there's no value at all when it leads to the ruin of those listening. Okay, so how would we know that? How would we know that those listening are being ruined? Well, are they being built up? Are they being benefited by the presentation of information from the discussion or debate? Are you presenting the great message? If we're just debating with other so-called Christians, people who claim to be Christian, but because they have different views from us, we argue with them versus trying to help other people learn about the great message. So it's a very easy way to sort of be active with spiritual things by arguing with people that will argue back. But the objective should be to present the message. The objective in any argument or debate should be to highlight what you believe is correct, not just to argue, and create drama. There's a lot of people like that. The other day, I tried to just ask a few questions to someone, and the lady broke down immediately. So not everyone is prepared to discuss even basic matters of life. And so we have to be careful who we converse with, because not everyone understands or is willing to even engage in lighthearted back and forth. They're very insecure about their beliefs or position, and that's fine. I'm not here to force people to discuss anything. But when people are presenting misinformation, when people are knowingly telling others what is not true, that's different. Then we have to step in, or at least try to balance the discussion so that the information isn't all one-sided, right? There's different circumstances where we might find ourselves involved with fighting about words, but if it ultimately leads to everyone being frustrated and the participants aren't willing to really talk about the meaning of the words, there's nothing wrong with finding out the meaning of a word. But to what extent? At what cost? Are the people involved genuinely trying to come up with an understanding? Like I was talking about the other day when I was dealing with some people, the lady wasn't really trying to come up with an understanding. I couldn't even get them to answer one question. And so there are times when you're not even trying to fight, but people end up fighting with you because they don't want to talk. And rather than tell you that, they would rather just create a dramatic situation to cover over the fact that they don't have anything to talk about, or they don't have any information to share. But they still disagree with you. You see, this is what creates the contention. You're trying to resolve an issue, but if you're not trying to resolve an issue with someone at least mild, somewhat reasonable, willing to exchange ideas and information, answer questions to get information, not answer questions like question after question after question when you already know the answer. I'm talking about getting to the truth of a matter. Those kinds of questions are okay. Well, why are you doing this? Or why did you say that? Or why did you conclude this? These help us understand the position of a person better. So there are very legitimate and good questions we should all ask, but that doesn't mean that we want to get involved in fighting about the words of our questions all the time, because as he says in verse 14, you must remember these things, emphatically bearing witness before God, Jah. So if we go out and fight about words and we're not proclaiming the great message, are we really bearing witness to Jah? Maybe, but we're more so bearing witness to ourselves and our own interpretation over and against the other person, which, if it has to do with something true, may be worthwhile to a point. But it doesn't take very long to establish a credible position if you know the information. And if a person isn't going to accept that credible information, and you've already tried to explain it to them, then you reach a point in the discussion where you have to ask yourself, am I really making any progress here? Or are the people who are around me just becoming more and more confused because I keep saying the same things and the person isn't listening? That happens. Of course, we want to try to help people understand what's happening, right? That's the idea of knowledge, debate, discussion in the first place. If we can't achieve an understanding, then what have we done? What is the purpose of our discussion if no understanding was achieved? Probably very little, if anything at all. So try to achieve understanding. Think of your discussion with people in terms of helping them understand your position. Maybe not convincing them 100%, right? That's very hard to do. But if you can make it your goal to achieve understanding, so that the point you're trying to make has been clearly established and explained, then that's a good goal. That's a point where you can use as a point in your discussion to decide whether or not you want to continue. That is, whether or not you've completely presented the information so that understanding should be or could be achieved. Right? Sometimes we have to keep talking or arguing about words until we achieve that understanding. But once that understanding has been achieved and you've made clear what the words mean, and there's really no longer anything left to debate except going back and forth over what you've already presented, that at that point you need to make an assessment as to what the value is of your time in continuing to deal with this person or these people. And then you have to remember too, like Paul says in verse 14, you're bearing witness before God. You're not doing this for men or for women or for humans. I mean, we are in one sense because we want to help them. But what I'm talking about is we're bearing witness to Jah and to Jesus. So our concern should first and foremost be to them. If other people get offended, and they will, like I said, just the other day, I asked one question and I couldn't even get a reasonable discussion started. So do not be surprised if people break down immediately and you just asked a question. Of course, if people can, question after question can make anyone frustrated. But what I'm talking about are people who refuse to really engage in a rational conversation, right? You ask them a question, it's not a trick question. You just want to know what their position is, what's their evidence, and they don't want to talk. That's a red flag, right? That means you're talking with somebody who isn't willing to share with you the things that they think support their beliefs and that prove yours are incorrect. Or they just don't know them well enough to be talking to you about them. Either way, you're probably wasting your time if you've already presented the essentials of what you're there to talk about. So we have to be very careful. I mean, this is probably the fourth or fifth text in going through Paul's letters where he specifically talks about not arguing, not fighting about words or debating unnecessarily. So this is very important for us because today, as you can see, there are people who run around today and who make a living basically debating other people. That's between them and Jah. But I think our primary value is going to be in helping other people, debating where necessary, but not fighting about words constantly. So if you're spending 50, 60, 70% of your time arguing, it might be time to dial that back and try to get it down to about 20%, right? Give at least 80% towards the promotion of the great message. I'm not trying to create a firm demarcation in terms of how much you should give. But I'm just saying, I would think it would be a little on the lower side, the debating, fighting, arguing, the things we're told not to do, except on rare occasion. And that the things we're told to do, proclaim Jah, Jesus, the great message, would be up in the 80, 90% of our time. But it's often not the case. It's often backwards because we've fallen into the trap of arguing over the things we like or that we're interested in or that are just easy to discuss with other people who want to argue with us about them. But I would encourage you to reconsider that, or at least not spend as much of your time doing so. Because like Paul, I don't see the real value, and I've done it myself. We all know I come from a background where I spent a lot of time debating, arguing with people, trying to establish the legitimacy of some of the teachings of the Bible that at that time were promoted by the Watchtower Society. So we do have to stand up for the truth. I'm not saying that. I couldn't say that. What I am saying is that if we're spending the majority of our time fighting over words, it's going to be very hard for us to do, as in verse 12 says, to not give up, because we're going to get frustrated to the point where we'll want to give up. And then, of course, if we want to live together like kings, we need to be strong, confident, so we never deny the Christ, and then he will never deny us. So, thank you all for joining me. This was a good day text for us. And we'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with another day text. So this Saturday's CW Jaw Talk show, I have a couple ideas, two really, that I'm going back and forward with. Either why Jah, why the name Jah, and we'll get into the divine name pronunciation issues, but focus primarily on Jah. Or I might get into the sexual identity, gender identity, how we can all get along in spite of our differences show. So it's going to be one of those two, and I will probably know by tomorrow morning, of course. So I don't want to save it for last minute. But these discussions are already things that I've kind of thought about and planned. It's just a question of which one I want to do, and then I give some thought to whether I can complement it with a great message. So it's either why Jah, or I'm going to get into the sex, gender, and how we can all get along topic. So I'll confirm that either later today with a tweet, or I will just officially announce Saturday's show tomorrow on Friday's Day Tech show. So until then, may you all have a wonderful day, and God bless you. In Jesus' name, thank you.